Brian, thanks for doing the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Well, it's a great pleasure. I mean, before we really get started, I just want to say that Bobby and I love the Mr. Deity show.
It's great.
We absolutely adore it.
Oh, well, thank you.
I want to ask you a quick question about the Mr. Deity. Am I correct in hearing one time during an interview you did say that they actually play some of these episodes in church?
Yeah, there are some very cool, one of my favorite things about the show is that probably based on the emails that I get, I would say about 40% of the people who watch the show are religious.
Yeah.
And, having grown up religious, I knew when I started this that most of the people are not the nut bars that we're seeing on the news, you know. They're pretty moderate, they don't take their religion so seriously, but they're into it and they like stuff that is about, something, it's almost a hobby for them. So, They will love watching something like this because they get the jokes. They know the backstory and the information that you need to be able to understand it, and they really enjoy it. So yeah, I've had pastors write me and asking for permission to play Mr. Deity in the really big favor for the opening of their Easter service, which is the one where we introduce Jesus. Yeah. And basically it's Jesus getting talked into doing the whole crucifixion thing by Mr. Deity.
Fantastic.
And these are churches that I can kind of get behind. I'm not thrilled with anyone being in religion, but if I have to pick one, I'm going with these guys.
Cool. All right. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but you grew up as the Latter-day Saint.
Yeah, correct.
Yes. I guess when and why did you decide to leave the Mormon Church, and when and for what reasons did you decide to leave?
Yeah, I left in 1993. The final straw for me was when the Mormon Church excommunicated 6 people. It's known as the September 6th. One of whom was D. Michael Quinn, who is without a doubt Mormonism's greatest historian. The problem is that he was telling actual true history, and the church didn't like that. Oh. And rather than tell him and show him where he's wrong, which they couldn't do, they simply excommunicated him. And for me, that was a Galileo moment. I was already kind of pretty much out. I had already figured out, by the early 90s, you were getting stuff. The archaeology was pretty clear. There weren't the peoples that the Book of Mormon claims there should have been in pre-Columbian America. And the DNA had come back, and the main claim of the Book of Mormon is that the Native Americans are Hebrew.
Yes.
And they clearly aren't. So I was kind of staying in still for cultural reasons. And, you grow up in it. It's hard. All your friends are Mormon. Your business contacts are Mormon. It's your whole life. And when they excommunicated those 6 people, I could not, in good conscience, say that I can continue to lend my name in support of this organization.
Yeah. So I'm curious, then, you talked about how, it becomes your whole life. You have friends and family and, business associates that are Mormons. What was the reaction from those people then when you decided to leave?
Well, I was one of those guys who went out slowly, and I became this kind of really liberal Mormon over the course of, I would say, 2 years. And I kind of was causing a lot of problems within my own little area, because I wanted to know if there were good answers to these problems that I was bringing up, so I would raise them in the gospel doctrine courses that we all go to on Sunday and stuff like that. Nobody really had any good answers, and it was just making everybody uncomfortable. In fact, at a certain point, I just stopped going because I realized I'm just making everyone feel crappy. And when I left, it was usually when a Mormon, when a sheep goes astray, as the Bible narrative suggests, you do everything you can to go back and get the lost sheep. Well, for me, it was like, okay, see ya. No. Don't let the door hit you on the ass on the way out.
Wow.
Take care. Don't bother coming back.
And they're kind of glad to get rid of you.
But my family, I had family who is, the irony is my dad converted to the church from Catholicism to make peace in the family with my mom. My mom wasn't really all that upset, but my dad was super upset. And I think part of it now is, he didn't realize he could get out. Oh. And I could have gotten out 20 years ago. What were you talking? He actually, After my mom's death, this is one of my favorite stories. After my mom's death about 12, 13 years ago, it took him about 2 years. He became an atheist by reading the Bible.
Yeah.
That's what did it for him. He actually read through the Bible, and I came to his house one day, and he said, "Do you know what's in this thing? It's disgusting. It's awful." I said, "Yeah, I do, Dad. That's kind of what I do for a living." So.
Now, I guess anytime we have a discussion about Mormonism, we kind of have to talk about Joseph Smith. We have to talk about what kind of person he was and how Mormonism really began. So if you could indulge us, talk a little bit about who was Joseph Smith and how did Mormonism begin and how did it spread?
Sure. Joseph Smith was a young kid growing up in upstate New York in Palmyra in the early 19th century who claimed to have had a vision of an angel who told him where a book was buried with the writings of the ancient Americans. You know, one of the things is people came to this country and they had their Bible, and the Bible never mentions people in these other places, and it's kind of strange, and you have to try to figure out where they come from. So Joseph's answer to that was that they were part of the lost tribes of Israel. They were Hebrews who came here 600 years before Christ and developed these massive, beautiful, amazing Middle Age societies like he knew of from the Old World, with steel and swords and chariots and horses and, pigs and elephants and all kinds of things that just don't happen to actually have been here during the time. So he was, I think, probably... from all the reading that I've done about him, I can't imagine a more charismatic figure in the history of the planet. I mean, this guy is people who hated him. Once they met him, he was able to convert them into being so impressed and taken with the guy. Obviously, just an amazing figure, and probably the most fascinating person in American history from my point of view. But he was clearly a con man. He's a guy who could make stuff up. He reminds me of the John Lovitz character from the old Saturday Night Live thing, where gold plates. Yeah, that's the ticket. Yeah.
Yes. This is my understanding that he also, before starting the religion and the teachings of the Mormon faith, didn't he do other tricks of the trade? Things like divine...
he was actually convicted. I can't remember what the charge is, but he was there were a lot of people digging for hidden treasure at the time, and Joseph had this stone that supposedly told him where buried treasure was. This is the same stone, by the way, that he later used to translate the Book of Mormon.
Oh,
a lot of people think within the church that he had this breastplate and these goggles called the Urim and Thummim, which is a biblical reference that he had to translate with. But when you actually read about what people said, how he did it, he put the stone in a hat and looked in the hat.
Yeah.
And, this is how he translated. The plates weren't there anywhere. It was just a stone in a hat. So...
Which sounds like a great way to start a religion. Yeah. It's a great origin story. So
better than the Amazing Randy, right there.
Yeah. So, how did it go from this guy who's been convicted of perpetrating, cons and who's obviously very charismatic? How does it go from him making up, lying and fooling people and being convicted of these crimes, and then how does the religion start to spread? I mean, why are people taken in by this guy? Is it just because of his charisma?
I honestly don't know. It is one of the great mysteries. But, to me, one of the most fascinating things about Mormonism is that there is so much documentation. I mean, this guy was having people walk around, follow him around, writing everything that he said. There's a 7-volume history of the church put together by B.H. Roberts, who was one of their later intellectual scholars, who, by the way, ended up having some big problems. He's the first guy that started to figure out that there were serious problems with this Native Americans as Hebrews story, and wrote a thing called, now it's called Studies of the Book of Mormon, which you can get anywhere, but it was hidden for, 70 years, and then the Mormons became very open in the 70s, and they let this out, and I think it was a disaster for them. But it's a microcosm of how religions began and flourish. I mean, when you actually look at it, it's just an amazing little you can take a microscope and look over all the little angles of how this stuff happens. You know, a lot of it is just people want to have some grand explanation for the existential angst that we all live in, of why we're here, what we're doing, where are we going to end up, and all of that stuff. And he tells a good story. It's a good story. It's kind of I have a feeling about theology that theology begins early with, if you look at the Hebrew Bible, God cares just enough to kind of give us some kind of direction. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you move to Christianity, and Christianity evolves into God actually cares.